My name is Nathaniel James Calloway, and 3 weeks ago, I stood in the lobby of my own family's company and watched my brother hand me a cardboard box. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He just said, "Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated." The way you'd read out a weather report. I smiled. I nodded. Then I laughed. Not a big laugh. Just enough that the security guard holding my box looked confused, and my brother's jaw tightened for half a second. Before he caught himself, he thought he had just won. He had no idea that 7 months earlier, a locked drawer in our grandfather's old workshop had already decided how this would end, and that a folder sitting quietly in a law office 3 blocks away made his entire ceremony meaningless. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and your local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 4 years to a Tuesday in October when my grandfather said something to me in that same workshop that I didn't fully understand, not until the morning after my brother fired me. The workshop smelled like machine oil and cedar shavings. That smell never left the building, not even after my grandfather stopped coming in every day. It lived in the wood of the workbenches, in the cuffs of the old canvas jackets hanging by the door. I was 25. My grandfather, Walter Calloway, was 78. And he still came to the plant floor every morning before the office staff arrived, walking the line with a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a joke gift from a Christmas party decades earlier that he refused to replace. That October morning, he had me help him refinish an old workbench that had belonged to his own father. Sandpaper first, coarse, then fine, until the wood went pale and soft under my palm. Rain was coming down outside, the kind of steady gray rain that made the tin roof. He didn't look up from the wood when he spoke. "A company is not the same thing as a family," he said. "But the people who forget the difference are usually the ones who end up losing both." I asked him what he meant. He just smiled and kept sanding. I didn't understand it then. I was too busy noticing the small, warm things, the way he always poured 2 coffees even when only one of us drank it, the way he kept a drawer of butterscotch candy for the floor workers, the way he remembered every employee's kid's name. There was a specific chair in that workshop, an old green vinyl thing patched twice with duct tape that nobody else was allowed to sit in. It had belonged to his own mentor, a man who taught him to weld back when the company was just 3 men in a rented garage. He kept it in the corner like a shrine nobody talked about. Once, when I was maybe 12, I asked him why he never replaced it. He said some things aren't supposed to be improved. Some things are supposed to be kept. The floor itself had its own rhythm, the hiss of the press machines, the low hum of the ventilation fans, and underneath all of it, always, a radio someone kept tuned to an old country station on the far wall. My grandfather knew the words to half those songs. He hummed them under his breath while he worked, off-key and completely unbothered by it. My brother Preston was 3 years older than me and worked 2 floors up in an office. That smelled like nothing at all. Carpet cleaner and cold air. Nothing lived in about it. Preston liked spreadsheets. He liked the word optimize. Even as a kid, he used to reorganize his birthday presents by resale value before he'd even open the boxes. At home, our father ran the business side with a calculator instead of a heart, and our mother had passed when we were young. The house was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. It was quiet the way a room is quiet. Right before someone says something they can't take back, the workshop was the only warm place I had. I remember one Sunday dinner where Preston told our father in front of everyone that the plant floor workers were legacy overhead. My grandfather set down his fork. He didn't argue. He just looked at Preston for a long moment, the way you'd look at a stranger who had wandered into your house by mistake. Nobody explained anything to me back then. Nobody had to. Even at 25, I could. Feel the shape of something coming, a slow shift in the air, like the pressure drop before a storm. I didn't have proof of anything. I didn't have power to stop anything. I just had a feeling, sitting quiet in my chest, that the version of this family I loved was already being erased, one meeting at a time. My grandfather got sick 18 months later. It started as forgetfulness, misplaced keys, repeated stories, and by the time the doctors gave it a name, it had already taken most of what made him who he was. Preston visited the hospital exactly twice. Both times he brought his laptop. I sat with my grandfather almost every evening that spring. Most nights he didn't know who I was. But some nights, for just a few minutes, he'd come back, clear and sharp, and he'd grip my hand and say the same thing every time. Protect the floor, Nathaniel. Protect the people who build the thing, not just the people who sell it. I told him I would. I didn't know yet what that would actually require of me. He died on a Thursday in March. I remember because it was raining, the same steady gray rain from that October afternoon in the workshop. At the funeral, Preston wore a black suit that still had the sharp fold lines from the store. He gave a eulogy about legacy and vision that never once mentioned butterscotch candy or the 2 coffees he poured every morning out of habit. 3 days after the funeral, I walked past our father's office and heard voices through the door left slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen. I just stopped, the way your body sometimes stops before your mind decides to. Preston was talking. With the old man gone, there's nothing holding up the floor headcount anymore. We restructure in Q3. We cut labor costs by 30%, and nobody upstairs blinks double quotes our father's voice, quieter. And Nathaniel's sentimental, Preston said. He'll get in the way. We'll deal with that when we get there. Restructure. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I didn't open the door. I didn't say anything. I walked back down the hallway, past the framed photo of my grandfather shaking hands with the first employee he ever hired, and I understood something for the first time. In the weeks after the funeral, I noticed the language around the office start to shift. Quietly, the way water finds a crack before it becomes a flood. The floor workers stopped being the team and became headcount. My grandfather's old habit of walking the line every morning became, in Preston's calendar, a site engagement audit, scheduled once a quarter and delegated to a junior manager. Even the workshop itself got a new label on the facilities map, Legacy Fabrication Annex, as if 40 years of history could be filed under a heading and forgotten. To them, I had become invisible, the sentimental brother, the one who still said hello to the machinists by name, who still remembered which line workers had new grandkids. Invisible people don't get consulted. Invisible people don't get warned. But invisible people also get to watch everything, I decided, standing in that hallway. That I would let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about me. I would smile. I would nod. I would keep saying good morning to the floor workers like nothing had changed. And I would wait. I just didn't know yet what I was waiting for. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the strangest possible way through my grandfather's old workbench. The same one we had refinished together that October. I had gone back to the workshop alone one evening, mostly because I missed the smell of it. Running my hand along the underside of the bench, out of habit more than intention, I felt something that didn't belong there. A shallow drawer built into the frame, disguised as part of the joinery. Inside, it was a single brass key and an envelope with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting. The letters slightly shaky from the illness, but unmistakably his. The letter was short. Nathaniel, if you're reading this, it means you finally went looking. Take the key to Marsh and Aldis on 5th Street. Ask for Diane. She's been expecting you longer than you know. W.C. I didn't go the next day. I sat with it for almost a week, turning the key over in my hand every night, half convinced it opened nothing more than an old filing cabinet. Part of me was afraid of what it meant if it opened something real, and part of me was afraid of what it meant if it didn't. When I finally walked into the law office, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a steady, unhurried voice introduced herself as Diane Marsh. She had been my grandfather's attorney for over 20 years. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked like she'd been waiting for this exact meeting to finally happen. Your grandfather set up an irrevocable trust 4 years ago, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. It holds 51% of the voting shares in Callaway Industries. You are the named trustee and sole beneficiary. I asked her why nobody had told me. Because he wanted you to earn the understanding of why before you inherited the power, she said. He said if you found it too early, you'd use it out of anger. He wanted you to find it when you were ready to use it out of clarity instead. Here's the part that mattered most. The trust had a single triggering clause, written specifically for a scenario my grandfather had apparently seen coming with unsettling accuracy. If Preston or our father ever moved to remove me from the company without cause, the trust would automatically activate, converting my shares from passive to controlling, and naming me chairman of the board effective immediately upon my formal acceptance. My grandfather hadn't just protected me. He had built a trap that only sprang if they proved, through their own actions, exactly who they were. Diane opened a second folder and slid it across the desk, years of quiet documentation. Board minutes he'd kept copies of, emails between Preston and outside consultants about headcount optimization, forwarded to Diane's office the same week they were sent. A handwritten note dated almost 5 years earlier that simply read, "If it comes to this, make sure Nathaniel understands it was never about revenge. It was about making sure the floor survives the people who forget what it's for." I sat in that office for almost an hour after she finished explaining everything, turning the brass key over in my hand, understanding for the first time just how long my grandfather had been quietly building a floor beneath my feet, even as everyone else assumed I was the one standing on nothing. Have you ever had to stay silent about something enormous, just watching the people around you make choices that would eventually cost them everything? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. 3 months later, I overheard the second conversation that mattered. Preston on the phone with our father laying out a timeline. September 14th, that was the date they'd chosen to finalize the restructuring. 30% of floor headcount cut. My role, as head of operations, eliminated the same week, folded into what Preston called a leaner leadership structure. He even used the phrase clean transition, like he was talking about a merger and not a family. I texted Diane 2 words that night. "It's time, ... She replied within a minute. "I'm ready when you are." That night, across town, Preston and our father sat in a steakhouse celebrating a plan they believed no one could stop. They ordered a second bottle of wine. They toasted to Q3. They had absolutely no idea that the ground they were standing on already belonged to someone else. Diane met with me twice more over the following weeks to walk me through exactly what needed to happen, and she explained it in plain terms, the way you'd explain something to someone you respected enough not to complicate. The moment they formally terminate you without cause, you have 30 days to file the acceptance, she said. Once you file, the conversion is automatic and irreversible. No board vote required. No shareholder challenge possible. Your grandfather made sure of that, ... I asked her what would happen to Preston. That depends entirely on what he does next, she said. The trust doesn't punish him. It just tells the truth about who actually built this company and who is only ever borrowing it, ... She also warned me about something I hadn't considered. The hardest part won't be the paperwork, she said. It will be sitting across from your brother, knowing what you know and saying nothing. Most people can't do that. Your grandfather thought you could. I asked her how she was so sure. She just smiled and said some people spend their whole lives being underestimated, and it turns out to be excellent training for exactly this kind of moment. Word of the coming restructuring leaked to the floor before it was ever officially announced, the way these things always do. Watched men and women I'd known my whole life start quietly updating resumes on their lunch breaks, saying nothing to management, saying everything to each other. One of them, a machinist named Roy, who'd worked the same press for 22 years, asked me, straight out, if the rumors were true. I told him I couldn't say anything yet, but that he should hold on a little longer before he made any decisions. He looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at someone you're deciding whether to trust, and then he nodded and went back to work. I never forgot that nod. Preston, in the meantime, made one last attempt to bring me over to his side. He invited me to lunch, which he never did, and told me over an expensive plate of food that he was thinking about creating a new special advisor role for me after the restructuring, something with a nice title and no actual authority. He called it an olive branch. He called it looking out for family. I'll think about it, I told him. He smiled like he'd already won. My younger sister, Callie, 17 and sharper than either of us gave her credit for, noticed something was different that week. She found me in the workshop one evening, sanding a corner of the old bench that didn't even need sanding anymore. "You've been weird lately," she said. "Not bad weird, just quiet in a different way." I told her I was fine. She didn't push, but she sat with me for a while anyway, the two of us. Saying nothing, the rain starting up again on the tin roof, exactly the way it always seemed to. The old green vinyl chair was still in its corner, the duct tape patches cracked and curling at the edges now. I sat in it for the first time in my life, something I never would have done while my grandfather was alive. It felt like being handed a set of keys to a house I already knew every hallway of. That night, alone in the workshop after Callie had gone home, I finally let myself feel all of it. I thought about how much easier this would be if Preston had simply been the kind of brother who called to check in instead of calling to calculate. I wish he had wanted the company because he loved what it built, instead of what it was worth. I wish our father had chosen to protect his sons instead of protecting a number on a spreadsheet. But wishes don't hold up a company. A trust does. I cried there for a while, sitting on the same stool I'd sat on at 25. It wasn't weakness. It was clarity, finally landing all at once. The way water finds its level after being held back too long. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to turn. September 14th arrived on a Tuesday. Preston called me into his office at 9 in the morning, flanked by an HR representative I recognized but had never spoken to. He didn't sit me down first. He didn't offer coffee. He simply slid a single sheet of paper across the desk and said, "Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated." I smiled. I nodded. Then I laughed, quiet enough that only he and the HR rep heard it, and I watched his jaw tighten for half a second before he caught himself. I signed the termination paperwork without a single objection. I even shook his hand. Then I drove straight to Diane's office. By 11 that night, I was back in the workshop, my laptop open on the same bench, sanded smooth years earlier by two people who loved each other more than either of us realized at the time. Diane, joined by video call, calm as ever, walking me through the final acceptance document one clause at a time. "Once you sign this," she said, "there's no undoing it. Are you certain?" I told her I had never been more certain of anything. At 11:58 p.m., I signed. At 12:03 a.m., Diane looked at me through the screen and said quietly, "Congratulations, Nathaniel. You're chairman of the board of Callaway Industries. I am 29 years old. I am chairman." And across town, in a house that never once smelled like sawdust, my brother was almost certainly asleep, dreaming about a leaner leadership structure he was about to lose entirely. He would find that out in about 9 hours. The next morning was our father's 65th birthday, an event Preston had planned as a kind of double celebration, family and business wrapped into one tidy afternoon. I showed up anyway. I brought a gift. I hugged our father and wished him well, and I meant it. Even with everything that had happened, Preston pulled me aside near the drink table, still writing the confidence of the day before. "About that advisor role," he said. "I meant what I said. We look after our own. I'll think about it," I told him again. And this time I let myself almost smile. His phone rang 4 minutes later. I watched him step outside to take it, watched his shoulders straighten and then slowly drop, watched the color leave his face as the company's general counsel explained in careful legal language exactly what it activated the night before and exactly what it meant for his authority starting immediately. He came back inside and looked at me like I was still the person he thought I was. I wasn't. I hadn't been for months. He didn't yell. He didn't even ask me anything. He just stood there, holding his phone, understanding for the first time that the floor he'd spent his whole life standing on top of, cleaner and cold air. Nothing lived in about it. Preston liked spreadsheets. He liked the word optimize, even as a kid. He used to reorganize his birthday presents by resale value before he'd even open the boxes, At home, our father ran the business side with a calculator instead of a heart, and our mother had passed when we were young. The now, my grandfather used to say that a company is not the same thing as a family, but the people who forget the difference are usually the ones who end up losing both. I used to think he meant that business and love simply didn't mix. He meant something harder than that. He meant that the moment you start treating people as line items, you lose the right to call what's left a family at all. Preston still holds a board seat today, a quiet, largely ceremonial one, and the two of us speak maybe twice a year, always carefully, always politely. He never apologized. Not directly, but last winter he sent me a photo of the old workbench from his phone with no caption at all, which, from him, might be as close to an apology as I'll ever get. Our father stepped down from daily operations within the year and now spends most of his time, oddly enough, walking the floor every morning the way his own father used to, coffee mug in hand, learning names he never bothered to learn before. Diane still handles the trust's remaining affairs and has become unofficially one of the closest things I have to family outside my own house. Callie works part-time on the floor now, learning the business the way it was actually meant to be learned, from the ground up, one machine at a time, and she already knows more of the workers' names than Preston ever did. As for me, I still have the workbench. I refinished it again last spring, alone this time, sanding it slow, coarse grit first, then fine, the same way my grandfather taught me. I think about him every time sawdust settles into the creases of my hands, and I think some inheritances are written in ink. The real ones are sanded into wood, one patient afternoon at a time. One more thing before I let you go. Last month, Preston walked into my office to request budget approval for something, a request he now has to make like anyone else on the leadership team. He stood there, folder in hand, waiting for my answer. I smiled. I nodded. And for old time's sake, I said, I'll think about it. He didn't laugh. I did. If you've ever had to stay quiet while you waited for the truth to finally catch up to someone, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.